Welcome, everyone. My name is Joy Connolly. I am honored to serve as president of the American Council of Learned Societies, or ACLS, as we're better known. I'm really happy today to welcome a new kind of constituency to ACLS's public events. And this is in response to two things, I would say. On the one hand, our increasing interest at ACLS, we've been around for a century, and we've had interest in all levels of humanistic education, and that is education in the humanities and interpretive social sciences for that whole time. And when I say education at all levels, I'm alluding, of course, to K-12 education, as well as college and university education, and of course, graduate school. But there's no question that in recent years, in recent decades, because of all the pressures on higher education, the growing skepticism about the value of humanistic research, changes in the academy, the way faculty are evaluated and rewarded, the ways in which doctoral education has become increasingly professionalized and specialized in most fields, the sites of higher education and of ACLS, there's no question, got focused really on the university and the college world, on the world of undergraduate education and graduate education. This isn't anything that was planned, this shift that's been happening over the past half century. And by and large, everyone you meet in higher education at the university or college level, whether they're students or faculty, they don't think this narrowing of focus is a good thing. Nonetheless, it has happened. So one of the reasons we're here today is to try to rebroaden the focus and to remind ourselves that the pursuit of a humanistic education and the circulation of humanistic knowledge is a much bigger spectrum. It's a continuum. It starts in the years in kindergarten, first grade, primary school, and it continues through junior high and high school into college, and beyond for some into graduate school. So that's really the reason why we're here, to really plant our flag on this territory, in the belief that more connections, more conversation, more dialogue across what has become kind of two different territories of college and university land and K-12 land, that we can bridge those territories and enrich the conversation and improve life and experience and humanistic knowledge on both, I don't want to say both sides, on all points in the spectrum. On the other reason, the second reason for our coming together is practical, and that is that the K-12 arena offers opportunities for doctoral students and master's students too in the humanities. We're focusing by and large on the experience of PhD students right for this initial discussion right now. But there are great opportunities for rewarding, remunerative, stable, interesting lives and careers in the K-12 teaching world. So with that as introduction, I wanted to explain why we at ACLS believed it was the right time for us, having been known as an organization focused on the university college experience and research and scholarship. All of those things are intimately connected with the world of K-12. So I will introduce the first part of our discussion, or of our presentation today, two associates from Carney Sandoe, one of the best known placement search firms in the K-12 world, in the universe, across North America, at least. I'm very happy to introduce Liam Gluck and Sloan Meyer. They're going to speak to us for a while. They're going to take some questions. We are going to shift then to a broader panel discussion, including some serving faculty at in K-12 institutions. So thank you, Sloan and Liam. It's really great to have you, and happy to have you share your experience at Carney Sandoe and the wisdom you're going to pass on to our audience. So thank you, audience members, for participating. Over to you, Liam and Sloan.
Thank you very much, Joy. That was a very rousing introduction. Makes us feel good about what we do.
For sure. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Before I do that, I just wanted to give us a quick introduction. Yes, our names are Sloan and Liam, but I also wanted to just contextualize us a little bit before we jump into our presentation. I joined Carney Sandoe about 6 years ago. Previous to that, I was a teacher and an academic dean at an independent school out in San Francisco. So I was a Carney Sandoe candidate. I then did hiring through Carney Sandoe, hired many PhDs to come teach on my faculty as a history teacher, and then joined Carney Sandoe, and now I do history placement and also religious studies. So helping folks on the more social studies side of the humanities find jobs all over the world, as Joy said, and then also work as our new graduate coordinator. So helping those coming right out of university, whether it's at the undergraduate level or the graduate level, as they kind of make that first foray into schools. And then Liam, I'll let you introduce yourself while I.
Sure. So just briefly, I've also worked at the company 6 years. I'm the English placement associate this year. So I'll work on all things kind of language arts or literature oriented in independent schools. Like like Sloan, I was a candidate with Carney Sandoe. I was a music teacher for a summer program and then for 2 years. And I lived and taught in Connecticut and Texas. I'll do that.
Great. All right. So we're going to get started here. So here's a little overview of what we're going to talk about. Mostly, what are independent schools? Why would you want to work in one? What jobs that means are available to you? What their qualifications are needed? What qualifications do you have already? And how can we help you showcase them? And then finally, why work with Carney Sandoe? Awesome. So go ahead, Liam.
Thanks. So we'll just cover a few bases on generally what independent schools are. So independent schools are K-12 communities that essentially do not take any sort of state level or federal level funding for their operations. So they are not mandated by state level requirements. They're not mandated by federal level requirements. Essentially, they are independent, and so thus their name, independent schools, financially. So all of their funding comes from private fundraising events, donations, capital campaigns, that sort of thing, and then tuition dollars. Not only are they financially independent, or perhaps because they're financially independent, they are independent in philosophy and governance. Each is driven by a unique mission, and each is directed by an administrative team, head of school, assistant head of school, division heads in the upper school, lower school, middle school, as well as the board of trustees. They're the people at the helm. They come in all shapes and sizes. So I, just for personal experience, taught at a boarding school called Loomis Chaffee in central Connecticut that had these sort of very grand brick buildings. And then I taught at an Episcopal school outside of Fort Worth, Texas, that was built in the 60s. So everything was sort of prefab, football stadium was massive, as you can imagine. So yeah, and two places that had completely different cultures, somewhat different missions, but yeah, I mean, they're neat places to be because I think they are independent in their mission and governance. There's a lot of buy-in among admin, but also faculty and staff and parents. Like families are sending their children and paying top dollar in many cases for something particular about the school, whether that's their top-notch academics, whether that's their focus on the whole child and sort of social emotional development, or whether it's whether there's a school out there with a religious component and a faith mission, or learning differences population. We work with schools that run the gamut, really.
And that's a nice thing about when you're looking to go into independent schools is that there's really a school out there for everybody. Similar to Liam, I worked at an independent school that was very small. It was just getting started, but it was very community focused. It was very student focused. I attended a boarding school that was arts focused. So, the whole reason you were at the school was because you wanted to be involved in the visual and performing arts in some capacity. And so as you are evaluating the community that you want to be a part of, it's really important to think of what's important to you in your own educational philosophy, and then look outward and see where are the schools that are going to fit in with that. So, we work with schools that are all sorts of different sizes and shapes. And there's a school out there that's going to fit in for you. It might be an Episcopal school in Dallas that has tons of people in a big football field. It might be, a small liberal arts leaning boarding school up in Michigan. So, there's lots of different things out there. And that's what the beauty of independent schools is, that they're not kind of one size fits all. There's a lot of different styles. Also, when we say independent schools, we're not just talking about private day and boarding schools. Oftentimes it does include charter schools, Montessori schools, parochial schools, basically any school, like Liam said, that's not tied to the public sector. It's going to be your typical, obviously, day and boarding, but then there's also a number of other schools that are included in that kind of like-kind independent style. So why would you want to work at these communities besides them just being independently cool places to work? So the number one thing is that you have a lot of autonomy in your classroom. So instead of being tied to state curriculum where you are constantly having to strive towards a test, there is a lot of independence in your classroom in terms of how you direct your curriculum. So while you may be a part of a department, one of many history teachers, that are working towards a goal, how you actually achieve that goal in your classroom is up to you. And so it will feel very similar to kind of being in your own college classroom. You get to design in the books that you're reading, the way that you pace your assignments, your lesson planning, things like that. There's also a lot of availability for electives. So my background is in medieval history. When I came to my independent school, I was interested in doing an elective that spoke to these interests, and the school was very supportive for me to develop an entire senior seminar that was based around medieval popular religion, which is what my background is in. My master's degree and my thesis is all in. So I was able to work with kids to develop research skills, help them develop a research question. We read primary sources. It was very much like a seminar class that I would have taught at the college level, but helping students kind of in their first foray into that. So you have a lot of flexibility with electives that you can build, a lot of flexibility in your classroom itself. You also have much smaller class sizes. So you get to have a lot of one-on-one time with your students, a lot of connection in the classroom, a community feel. And the Harkness style, seminar style is very much the style of pedagogy in independent schools. So much less kind of big lecture styling, more so student-focused, student-centered, inquiry-based learning that's happening in the classroom. And you're able to do that because you have the smaller class size. That also
as harkened. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
As harkened by what we were talking about on the last slide, the fundraising by private dollars. So there is literally and sort of the emotional component too of buy-in at these places from parents, from faculty, and from admin. So you do get a very close-knit community feel. Kids will wear the sweatshirt of their school name all around campus, and it's not unusual or not uncommon at all to get involved outside of the classroom in some way, or just get to witness students out of the classroom, whether that's in a dorm environment, if you're at a boarding school, or on the soccer field or basketball court, if you're attending a game. So there are places that really value relationships, I think, between students and teachers, and also relationships among teachers. There's a lot of opportunity for collaboration at these places. And again, that's sort of a component of the curricular freedom that you have. If you want to co-teach a class on the Civil War, if you're a history teacher and you want to teach alongside a literature teacher, you can absolutely do that, given the schedule or what's going on that particular year. So, I think relationships are big, mentoring is big, really getting to know your students as a person, but also just as a thinker, a writer, a student goes a long way. And another great component of these environments is that, they're very well resourced, and there's lots of opportunity for professional development. So, if you wanted to start some sort of student club, you could absolutely do that. If you wanted to take your kids to a museum that was in a city different than your own, you could absolutely do that. My school in Texas flew the honors art students to New York City for 4 to 5 days every fall, and we would see Broadway shows. I got to take my honors piano students to the Steinway Piano Factory in Queens. And they're just such fun, such enriching experiences that you can have with students, and you can go beyond the sort of typical milieu of science museum or art museum or whatever it is. I mean, if you're someone who's interested in the archaeological side of history, there are schools out there that will send their students on digs and teach them skills, how to preserve artifacts that are found, how to excavate according to whatever the national laws where you are. So the opportunity are really boundless and really exciting. Yeah. I would say.
Just 2 more examples of what Liam's talking about. when I joined my school, they did not have a world religions kind of Asian history focused. And so I built that curriculum from the ground up. And then the culminating experience was taking 42 students, the freshman and the sophomore classes together to China for a 13-day trip so that they could go and visit and see the things that they had been studying over the past 2 years. And then just recently, I was speaking to somebody who teaches at an independent school who developed a Silk Road curriculum. And the culminating experience is taking students to follow the Silk Road and then work on an archaeological dig for the summer. So these are experiential learning opportunities that often people associate only with university, but are happening at that K through 12 level, mostly in the high school, but there's middle school experiences that happen as well, like East Coast trips and other trips for service and things like that. And so you often think, what jobs are going to be available for me if I'm coming out with a PhD? Where do I start? What do I do? And the thing is that all primary and secondary subjects are available. What schools look for is not a certification. You don't need to get a teaching certification to teach an independent school. Your PhD is certifying you in that. What they're looking for instead is, your subject expertise. Do you have the degree in what you want to teach? Have you experience researching and working in the subject, extensively? Because these are college prep communities. The levels of academics are very high, and so they want educators who have the subject mastery so that you can pass on that passion and that expertise to the students. And so your PhD qualifies you for many of those jobs. Instead, they're looking for you to be able to showcase that you understand what it's like to work with a different age group than a university student. So, understanding that a lot of the times your work, while it will be subject focused and very subject driven, a lot of it will also be skills based. So teaching students how to do that first research paper, working with them to help them develop as writers if you're working in the humanities, helping them develop critical thinking questions and understand what it's like to be an academic person. Those are the skills that you're teaching as a high school teacher, as a middle school teacher, in addition to imbuing them with the spirit of love of subject, right? So a lot of people's first and most special memories are of their high school teachers who were very passionate about their subjects. So bringing your passion that drove you to pursuing a PhD to the classroom is just going to go on to inspire those kids. And that's what schools are looking for, that kind of spark, somebody who's really excited to get in there and help kids and also talk about exciting, interesting stuff. And so any kind of experiences that you have working with children in some capacity, whether that's tutoring, whether that's TAing while you were doing your work, teaching your own courses, those are all good experiences to put on your resume that will qualify you for jobs in independent schools. But then extra things as well, like maybe you were a camp counselor growing up, or maybe you coach sports on the side, in addition to doing your PhD, or you were the leader of the Model UN at your own university. All of these things are extracurricular activities that are going to showcase that you are, engaged with the community and would be open to doing that on campus.
Well said, Sloan. The only two things I would add would be just sort of encouragement for the student bodies that we work with and we represent. A lot of academics or former academics, recovering academics perhaps, who have taught at the college level, arrive at middle schools or high schools and say, we're getting through texts that some of my college freshmen couldn't get through. You end up teaching, very bright, or at least very earnest, very curious people. And I think it's an exciting stage of development in which, a high school student, while they might give you some attitude as typical of a teenager, has not decided how the world works yet. They don't really know. Whereas a college student might. And not only that, but you get to see this student grow over the course of an entire year. You'll see them from August or September all the way through to May, and you may even teach them in multiple grades. You might teach a freshman English class, and then the junior American literature seminar, and you'll have kids who you taught freshman year 2 years later show up at your classroom again. So there's a lot of richness in relationships that can develop, but there's also just a lot of growth and development that's possible academically and skills-based, as Sloan was saying, at this level. I think contact points are more, and just general curiosity can be higher, which is exciting.
And I know that there's a lot of folks coming to this webinar from religious studies backgrounds as well. And so I did want to say that it doesn't always have to be academic. There are other jobs on campus for individuals. So if you are interested in pursuing chaplaincy or religious leadership on campus, that is definitely available at some schools, especially schools that have religious backgrounds. But then also outside of just being in the classroom, let's say that you did a lot in admissions or you did a lot with college counseling, admissions work or counseling work as a tutor. There are a lot of different roles at independent schools that are not always based in the classroom. The classroom is a great way for you guys to come into independent schools with your background as PhDs. But if you have other things in your background that maybe draw you towards fundraising, they always have a development office on campus. They have admissions office, external relations. So there are lots of ways to get involved with these schools, even if teaching is not necessarily exactly where you thought you would end up. There are other avenues for work in independent schools. I think I kind of overcovered some of this, but basically it's your qualification is your PhD. Congratulations, you did it. And then trying to find different ways to market the work that you've done with children. So if you've done tutoring, if you've taught your own kind of 100 levels, 200 levels classes, they're not so far off from being seniors in high school if they're freshmen in college. So that's always great experience as well. But working with Carney Sandoe is a great way to help tailor your resume to really showcase these things, because we can work with you individually one-on-one to really highlight the pieces of your background that are going to showcase this enthusiasm for getting involved. Liam, did you have anything else to say about this one before I move to the next?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, we can get to what we do.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So we're just going to go really quickly through this stuff. We've been around since 1977, as Joyce said. We've been around, and helping for quite some time. We work in most of the United States. I think the only two states we don't work in are Alaska and I think North Dakota. But besides those two states, we have schools in every single one, and we work all over the country. So, we have a wide swath, and we're also able to very much individualize the approach to you and your job search. And so, Liam, you want to run us through this?
Sure. Yeah. So what we'll do, we'll partner with you again as an individual candidate and get you basically to build a profile with us. And that profile will include documents like letters of recommendation, a personal statement, and then a resume. To answer one of the questions asked, we do appreciate 1 to 2 page teaching resumes, because that's what independent schools appreciate, as opposed to an academic CV. So there are a lot of times there's some reformatting or reworking that needs to be done there. We divide it by subject area. So as we said, Sloan will take on all the history and social sciences folks. I kind of take on the literature, language arts oriented folks. We have a conversation with you about where you want to be, what kind of school you'd want to work at, why teaching at the high school level, just to get to know you as a person, as a potential teacher. And then we send you targeted and or tailored referrals based on your preferences that you've indicated with us. So if you want to be in New York City only, we will only send you positions in New York City. If you are looking throughout the Western US, we will show you things in Utah, Washington State, and California. So you basically get to decide where your file gets to be sent. And it's our hope that, through our partnerships with schools, and because we know our candidates better than some sort of anonymous job board, you move toward the top of the resume pile, depending on qualifications. We also offer ongoing support, and consultation. So it's not as though we chat with you once and then we're done. We check in with you throughout the hiring year, giving you the opportunity to ask any questions that are particular to your job search, going over your documents with you if that's something you'd like to do. And then, we can also check in towards later stages of the hiring process to figure out timelines of certain schools. So if you've got an offer on the table, but your number one school said they'd get back to you in a week, we'll double check on that, and we'll try to figure out where schools are in the hiring process. One of our, I think, greatest assets is our hiring events. So we're going to do a mix this year, obviously post-COVID, of in-person and virtual hiring events. We'll kick the hiring event season off, with our diversity event that's going to include a week of professional development on issues of diversity, equity, and belonging in independent schools. And that will also have a 2 or 3 day hiring component as well. So it's basically just a set time that schools schedule first round 30-minute conversations with candidates for openings that they have. So we put those on, and we also put on most of the professional development. And then we have what we call the puzzle blog on our website. That's just sort of a static, well, not static, it's, it's changing and we're adding articles, but it's a resource for you there at all times on our website. So.
And I would say that, Liam and I work with a number of PhDs. I mean, it's something very common that we see folks coming out of academia looking to have, more meaningful connections with students in the classroom, less tied to, research deadlines and things like that. And so I would say that if you've ever thought about it and thought, oh, that doesn't seem like something that I could really pull off, it's something that we see people pull off all the time. This is a transition that is very common. And it is something that independent schools are looking for. They're looking for subject experts. And if you have a PhD, you are the top experts. So, people who are coming from academia backgrounds are very much sought after in independent schools. And so, working with someone like us, Carney Sandoe, can help us help you, tailor your materials, like going through that CV and truncating it to a 1 to 2 page teaching resume, helping you highlight the things in your background that are going to stand out to an independent school that you may have, shrugged off as not important when you were applying on the academic circuit. And so, we can bring our subject expertise and our market knowledge to the table to kind of help you as you navigate this process, which is something that we see happen a lot. So you're not alone in your endeavors in that capacity. And so I just wanted to quickly go over this timeline just so that you have a sense, because it's a little bit different from public school timelines and other job searching timelines. And so it tends to be right now that is the busiest part of the season. So if you are looking for jobs and you are looking to begin teaching in the fall of next year, or even for a mid-year position, now is the time where you should start collecting your materials, filling out a profile if you do wish to work with Carney Sandoe, and getting those applications in. Because March and February, March, April tends to be the top time where all interviews are happening, and then decisions being made in the kind of early spring, early summer. So April, May, June, decisions are made, and then things get pretty quiet over the summer. So not a lot of hiring is done in the summer, which is kind of a oxymoron. People think that, they hire in the summer to start in the fall. Nope, they're hiring now to start in August of 2022. So I just wanted to make sure that timeline was out there, because if you are thinking about it, whether you're going to work with Carney Sandoe or you're not, this is the time to be working on it. All right. And so with that kind of background, we will hand it over. I just wanted to put this up here. Our emails are there. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us directly. But then we'll move over to the Q&A, and I'll pass it over back to Joy.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I will, I think we can take about 10 minutes, not more than that, to answer a couple questions really specifically for you. And this isn't to say that all the questions people have for you are offline after 4:40, but Eastern time, but I want to spend 10 minutes dedicated to this. And I'm going to pull out a couple questions. One that came up was that I think is probably on everybody's minds, and that's the issue of presenting one's experience, the kind of experience you gain in the course of a PhD program, which doesn't involve contact with anyone below the age of 18 typically. Mm-hmm. How does one transform that into a compelling story for an independent school?
That's a great question. You've had, I think, the gift in many ways, and also just the advantage of seeing and teaching and observing the work of freshmen in college in a lot of cases, right? You're teaching the survey courses at a general level at, a university or college setting. So you know the expectations of like where college writing needs to be, and you're probably pretty well versed in how there can sometimes be a gap in what your students are producing. So I would definitely lead with the fact that, you're interviewing for a college preparatory environment, what college expects. So you can bring those kind of requirements or those expectations into your work would be the first thing, that I could imagine saying.
Yeah. And I agree 100% that you coming from a college environment, you're going into a college preparatory environment, your expectations for writing and understanding of where writing needs to be when a student enters is extremely important, and you can lead with that. But then also there's so many places at the university level where connections and interactions happen outside of a classroom environment. So talking about office hours, talking about mentorship, talking about, helping peers as they navigate writing papers, as they navigate, dissertation conversations. There's so much community work that's done at the college level that is mirrored at the independent school level. So talking about those kind of out of classroom experiences that you've had as well, and how that has prepared you to serve as an advisor or a mentor to those that are at the younger ages. You've held office hours before. You've been the TA for a professor that didn't have time for the freshmen, so you were the one that had to answer all of the questions and be there when their paper was melting down. Those are conversations that are going to serve you well. So being able to kind of highlight those crossroads and experiences that aren't necessarily in the classroom but are community driven will be really helpful as well.
Great. I think we have time for a couple more. I'm identifying the ones that are getting votes. Remember, I'll remind audience members you can vote for questions you like, and that'll push them up in the screen. So I'm going to combine a 2 or 3 questions. And we got a question about someone who had an experience approaching a search firm, maybe Carney Sandoe, maybe another one, and who was told that a PhD in religious studies wouldn't play, that there were no jobs available for someone with the person's qualifications. And there are a couple of other questions about niche PhDs, like in theater arts, or I think what people have in mind are the kinds of fields that don't map onto a high school curriculum in an obvious way. Could you talk about how that's viewed? Has there been a shift in recent years? How does one navigate the issue of niche specialization and the kind of generalist expertise one needs in teaching high school?
Sure. Well, as the religious studies person, I will say it wasn't me, because I bring them all on. I will say that there's definitely, I work with people with all different types of backgrounds. So I've got people with archaeology, sociology, religious studies. The niche backgrounds are there, and I think that there's a place for them at many, many schools. I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and that can definitely be a tough answer to hear, because you're like, well, what does that mean? There are schools out there that will specifically look for people that have those niche PhDs because they have programming that they want that person to teach. So, but then there are other schools that will be very specific that the PhD needs to be in history for this job. And unfortunately, that just seems to be the case for many independent schools. Each job at the independent school will be very specific about what they need. So maybe at one school, one year, they might need someone with a PhD in history, but the next year they'll take someone with a PhD in religious studies because the background is going to be different. It's challenging when you're looking that year and there's nothing there. That can be challenging. But I would say we're open to any and all, and many independent schools are open. The challenge is showcasing how you're able to play in many sandboxes, even with your niche PhD. I'm sure that with a PhD in religious studies, you didn't just study religious studies. You have a lot of things that went into your background to get you there. So there's a lot that you can bring to the table, and we can kind of help massage out where that is. And then I would let Liam speak to the kind of the niche performing arts ones, because he handled music placement for a very, very long time. I don't know if you want to talk more about the arts.
Sure. Yeah, just briefly. And I don't know if the news is slightly more disappointing than Sloan's news, but performing arts in independent schools, just by nature that they're smaller communities, tend to be pretty skills based. So if you're like a music historian or a musicologist, for example, unless you had a tangible instrumental or vocal skill, you probably weren't going to be doing much ensemble work, as opposed to somebody with like a master's in choral conducting or a master's in piano performance. And I imagine that the same goes for theater programs. So if you're a PhD in theater arts, but you've taught acting, or you've taught playwriting, or you've taught stage design, or something kind of tangible to, say, like a High School Musical production, for example, that makes you all the more competitive. So again, as Sloan said, it's just sort of to massage out like what skills or what past experience do you have that's relevant to the core curriculum of a school. So when we say core curriculum, I certainly don't mean something akin to like a public school, but if your specialty is like Shakespearean drama studies, there's a world in which you're teaching theater 1 and theater 2 to freshmen and sophomores, and then you craft this like creme de la creme elective on, Shakespearean tragedies, and maybe you put one on every year or every 2 years, and the kids study them, and then you can go to the Globe Theater every 5 years or something and see a performance live. So there is a way to work in what you love, I think, in an elective capacity or in a 1 or 2 kind of course capacity or even an experience capacity. But you're probably also going to be teaching more general things just to sort of round out that job based on where the student demand and where the numbers fall.
Definitely. I just had a conversation with a philosophy PhD just today, talking about how in the dream world, his dream job would be to teach all philosophy classes, but oftentimes there's just one philosophy class. And so he has to fill out the rest of his preps by doing other things. And so we had a very long conversation about, well, where are other places that you feel comfortable? And most of that laid in like the world religions, world history side of things, because that's where he had done most of his background. But, others it might be different. But you have to kind of think about how you're going to fill out the rest of those classes in a high school world that doesn't have as many of those niche classes one after another.
Great. I'm going to ask one more very brief question before bringing on 2 teachers and 1 administrator who are going to join us, and we're going to keep the conversation, the Q&A going because I see a bunch of questions thanks to our brilliant audience that are going to be of interest to all of you, Carney Sandoe people, as well as faculty, as well as administrators. So, but my very brief question before we bring on the other 3 panelists is the most popular, it wins the popularity test in the chat, and it is about salary. Can you give people a sense of the salaries available at this level, understanding there's a lot of variation?
So unfortunately, not really. So we have a lot of historic salary data, and what we have found to be more helpful is having specific conversations when dealing with a job that's coming to fruition. Because since independent schools are not under a union or an umbrella, the public spectrum, they are not tied to any kind of salary dedicated range. And so even sometimes within the same school, salaries may vary for job based on background, based on the number of classes you're teaching, based on the different things you're doing after school. It's kind of like a calculus project to come up with salary. What I will say is that there's often this myth that independent schools pay, drastically lower than public schools, and that is very much a myth, especially in urban areas where schools know that they have to pay living wages, competitive salaries to attract teachers. And so often that myth comes out of like the idea of a pension versus retirement funds and things like that. And so I would say, while we don't have a range where we can say this is the number, I mean, I can give you a range. We can see everything in the country from 25 to 30K up to 150K, 190K, but that range is not helpful to you. And so location, the role that you're doing, your own background is all going to play into it. And once you get to the piece of the puzzle where you're actually going to be signing a contract, your Carney Sandoe person, if you're working with Carney Sandoe, can help you get historic data, talk about salaries that they've offered to people similar to you in the past, telling you if that offer is fully fleshed out or has room for growth, or if you're going to be going back and hearing no. Like, we can help you have that conversation to make sure that you're getting at a salary that's fair for you. Did I cover that
one small point to distinguish would be boarding versus day schools.
Yes.
So boarding schools, I did not know this as somebody who worked at a boarding school and did not attend one. You can live for free, or at least the living package is tied in as part of your hiring package. So boarding school salaries tend to be significantly lower than day schools, but that comes with the huge perk of no mortgage, no rent, no utilities, etc.
And sometimes not even food. I mean, if you get all of the amazing dining hall that's all like organic and from the farm, then you're not going to have to buy groceries either.
Right.
So that's also a big perk.
Yeah.
Thank you. These glimpses into real life are really crucial, and that's a perfect segue into inviting our remaining 3 panelists to join us. And I'm going to ask them to make themselves visible, hit their video, and I am going to ask them to quickly introduce themselves and describe their role just in one sentence so we can get straight to Q&A. Thank you all so much for participating. Let me start with Katerina, then Josie, and then Stephen. Katerina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Katerina Matro. I have been teaching for 6 years, and those 6 years were in an independent all-girls Catholic school. And just this school year, I started in a very large public high school. I teach US history and sociology this year.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me and for attending this. My name is Josie Rodriguez. I'm currently the chair of upper school history at the Berkeley Carroll School in Brooklyn, New York. And I have taught at 3 independent schools, all in New York City, but very different schools from each other. And this is my peer in the classroom. And then I went to graduate school, received a PhD, and then returned to teaching.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Wilson, delighted to be with you. For the last 30 years, I've been working in charter schools, starting charter schools around the country. Most recently began and ran an organization called Ascend Learning, which opened charter schools in underserved communities in Brooklyn and was able to actually close and reverse the achievement gap, at least as measured by standardized tests. So a really exciting experience and eager to be here to share some of our learnings.
Thank you all so much. And and again, just want to celebrate the appearance of high school faculty in an ACLS event. And it will not be the last time. It's not the first, but it won't be the last either. So thank you again. And Stephen, same for your experience as an administrator in the K-12 world. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions that, or with one question that I know is on the top of mind for a lot of PhDs, particularly people either buried in their dissertations or recently having come out of that experience. And that's their passion for research and what kind of role or is there time available for research for people teaching high school? Does it inflect or inform the teaching role or faculty role in any other way? However you want to take this question, and I will open it up. Yeah, Katerina.
I love this question because this was definitely one of my biggest concerns when I left academia. And I think what also, I saw the question in the Q&A, what also plays into it a little bit is this sense of, am I going to be as respected as a researcher when I'm not coming from an academic institution? I think that's a worry that, we are all dealing with. I would say that the time issue is real. But what is also true is once you settle into a school, I think people say that the first 2-3 years are pretty brutal in terms of getting used to the rhythm, prepping, grading, which is way more grading. But once you've sort of settled in, you will see a routine and you will have more time to read and write. I don't think compared to my friends who are, assistant professors on the tenure clock somewhere, that the time differential is really, all that big in terms of how much time do you have in your life to do other things. I have personally made this sort of like a militant goal of myself to just keep doing it and keep showing up at academic conferences and keep presenting papers. And I very self-confidently proclaim that I'm a high school teacher and here's my research. And I have met with a lot of encouragement, and I love that I have almost these 2 lives that I'm living, and I get a lot out of these conferences and talking to academics, and then I bring that stuff back and that inspiration back into my classroom. And I also, and Joy commented on this in her introduction, I also feel that high school teachers have a lot to teach to academics about, what matters. And if you want your research to get in front of an audience, and if you don't want your majors to be declining, you need us on your side, kind of. So I actually enjoy that dialogue between academia. And I think it's just, you have to do time management and it works. I wouldn't count on it working well in the first 2 to 3 years, but then there is a prospect of it happening.
I wanted to add a little bit of a different perspective. I agree with Katarina, absolutely everything you said, but I think also one of the great things about teaching high school is that your interests evolve over time. And we all, we're in academia because we love learning. And as it turns out, I've learned all kinds of new things that I would not have predicted. Like I became a sort of expert in Latin American history in order to teach a Latin American history elective, which is not what I pursued in graduate school. So I think there's a real opportunity to kind of discover new things and new interests that we want to learn about that perhaps in academia we wouldn't find because we are kind of in our own field.
Thank you. I want to turn next to a question that comes up from a bunch of people on the Q&A, and that's about how best to prepare for the process once, and I'm going to focus on the on-campus part. Once you've gotten past the initial screening, and maybe I can, the Carney Sandoe associates as well as Stephen will be able to draw from their experience on like top thing to do, top thing not to do. Stephen, can I start with you?
Sure, and my comments, Joy, will be, of course, focused on charter schools, and charter schools primarily, as I mentioned, serve underprivileged kids. So there may be some important differences, but in our world, we've moved almost exclusively to emphasizing the demo lesson. So that's where all the action will be. You'll be thrust into a classroom in front of kids, and your ability to command their attention and respect is unbelievably important. I'm not going to deceive you about that. So your presence and your some level of confidence or even charisma is vitally important. There are definitely ways that you could prep for that. There's an excellent book by Doug Lemov called Teaching Like a Champion. Despite the hokey title, it's a deeply thoughtful work about some of these techniques, and that would be excellent preparation, because that is going to be one of the most important things that's going to be assessed, is whether you're going to be able to manage the classroom. And then from there on out is, can you intrigue them? Can you excite them? Can you get them to do the work in the course of your demo lesson?
Thanks. Can I ask the Sloan and Liam if you have advice to share of what you've seen work or not work, and then we will turn it to Josie and Katarina for this one to get multiple perspectives on this important question.
I would say I agree with Stephen that the demo lesson is very important, and it's not always so much about the content, though content is very important. It's they're not expecting you to come in to a class that you've never seen before and all of a sudden deliver the best lesson that you've ever delivered. It's more, how are you able to interact with kids? Are you able to show the different styles of learning in your lesson? Are you able to effectively communicate with them, connect with them, spark their learning and their engagement? Those are things that people are going to be looking for in the classroom. As both someone who's coached people through this and who has done it themselves and also done the hiring, it's kind of a crazy thing, to have to go into a room that you've never seen the children before and then command their attention. So it can be a little bit daunting, but so long as you just prepare and talk to the person whose class you're going to be taking over, so that you kind of know where they're at. And then come prepared to show off all of your different styles. Yeah, you'll be good.
So can I just add very quickly to that? I think that's so correct. And the other thing that's really important is that what happens after the demo lesson. Do you show, I see nodding, receptivity to feedback, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A significant level of humility. And recently, there's a lot of asking you to go back and do it again, to do a piece again,
exactly.
based on the feedback that you've just received. So you have to be deeply listening and trying to incorporate that feedback and try it again. So you got to be, that requires a lot of courage and humility.
Yes, I would say 100% to that, Stephen. I think that the biggest mistake you could make in a demo lesson and in an on-campus interview is being too rigid and thinking that you were perfect in the way that you delivered your lesson. So being open to, a lot of times schools want to see ability to collaborate, ability to be open to change. And so coming in with an attitude of there's nothing that I did wrong is never going to get you places.
And also neither pitching too high nor too low in your lesson difficulty is critically important and non-obvious.
Can I ask, as I invite Josie and Katerina to weigh in on this too, what kinds of experiences, you're a busy dissertation writing person, or you're teaching, maybe in a contingent position, or you're in an assistant professorship and you've decided this isn't for you. And I know a couple people in this situation, you decided to make the move. You're busy is my point. How do you gain the experience, any kind of experience that would help you do well in the situation you just described of being thrust into a classroom with an age group of kids that, whether you have kids or not, it's not a situation that's familiar to you. Are there ways in which you can gain that experience? Yeah, Katerina, please.
So what helped me a lot was I signed up right away. Once it became clear to me that this is what I wanted to do, someone gave me the invaluable advice to sign up, to contact several independent schools in my area and sign up, put myself on the substitute teacher list. And I made clear as I was signing up that I'm writing a PhD, I'm super busy, I can't do this like 24/7, but I would, I'm available and I'm excited about this. And that gave me a network in town. But I also saw, and it gave me FaceTime with students, but I also saw, because you will be handed a lesson plan when you substitute teach. I also saw how these teachers who are very experienced set up their lessons. So that was, and then I had to teach the lessons that they gave me. So that was, I think, invaluable. If I hadn't, that's also how I ended up getting the job in the end. And I would encourage anybody to do that. There's a teacher shortage in this country right now. People are desperate for substitutes, and they will gladly take you. And it's such an important foot in the door to see a school building from the inside, and so much valuable classroom experience and interactions with more experienced colleagues who are always interested in getting to know more people. So definitely go for that. And it's a very easy process.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this one? How to get experience in applying for any piece, not just the teaching demo, but there are a couple of questions here too about resumes versus CVs, and general questions about how to get advice or help. To whom do you go as you're starting this track? We hear this a lot at ACLS. So for people working PhD seeking diversity of careers, of all types, that their advisors and dissertation committee are the last people to ask, because they only have experience within colleges and universities. So to whom does one go, or what other experiences?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that in the charter world, increasing number of networks of charters. So this is distinguished from what we call the moms and pops, the individual charter schools. But those that are part of a network often have websites with videos of exemplary instruction, which will give you an idea of what that particular organization values in teaching. So you'll begin to get a real strong sense of how they think about excellence. I think that could be very instructive.
Great, thanks. I want to turn then to a question about that has a few people asking it, about international students. Is it maybe the Carney Sandoe people can kick us off, but then the Josie and Katerina and Stephen, you can talk about your experience with international colleagues. Is this common? Is the road harder? Are there bars that our audience need to know about?
So sorry, just to clarify, is this PhD students who are on this webinar who are international?
Or people who are advising them, non-US
Okay.
citizens who are interested in pursuing this path.
Right. That can be tricky, unfortunately. I think unless you're a teacher of a foreign language, or English as a second language, or English as another language, most of our schools will not sponsor any sort of visa. So permanent residency, green card, US citizenship, and or an OPT visa would essentially be our limits. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sloan.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Liam. Unfortunately, it is very difficult for schools to sponsor. So they're very happy to hire you if you have an OPT, and if you have a PhD in a particular subject, specifically STEM subjects, you get to expand that OPT to 3 years. But beyond that, it's pretty difficult. And a lot of the burden falls on the individual to do the research and get all of the kind of ducks in a row to then deliver to the school for them to evaluate whether or not they can sponsor. But we do work with some international schools. So like the French American schools, the British American schools that are, or a lot of IB schools that are a little bit more nuanced and savvy about how to sponsor, because a lot of their faculty comes from abroad. So in those cases, we have found some people being a little bit more open, but I would echo what Liam said, that unfortunately there's just not a lot of options in the United States itself.
Thank you. So, I mean, thank you for your honest, candid answers. That's why we're here. Let's turn to the question of, of having a PhD, understanding the culture around the PhD and assumptions that people may or may not have, trying to navigate that situation in a job interview process. So, as one questioner puts it, to what extent is it advisable to play up having a PhD in an interview? Is there a danger of appearing overqualified? How does that play? And if I can extend that into the experience of actually being in a school, at a charter school or independent school, when one gets the job and finds oneself in the culture of a school, are there words of wisdom you can share from your experience about how to navigate the having the PhD? Is it an issue? Is it a advantage? Is it a problem?
I can only speak for the one place where I was working for most of the time. And there, I would say that humility was appreciated. I think they liked the fact that I had a PhD, but the fact that that was on my resume was sufficient. I didn't need to talk about it. I think it would have annoyed people if I had talked about it. I think individual people, like for example, my department head, who loved history and wanted to surround himself and wanted to staff his department with people who loved history as much as he did, appreciated that I had the academic background, and he wanted, smart, knowledgeable people around, and that was very much the culture of the place. But it was clear to me from the beginning that I couldn't have waltzed in there and said, oh, I have a PhD in history, and so I know all this, and this is all the work that I've done. What was way more valued was I a team player? Can I relate to teenagers? Do I know how teenagers tick? Am I funny? Do I have a sense of humor? And then in addition, I also have very deep subject knowledge, but that was not something that I think would have been appreciated if I had played it up too much.
That's right. I think in the public education space, it's even more challenging. So, public K-12 education in this country has a long and ugly history of anti-intellectualism, let's just be honest. And so that is a challenge. And so I think it's important to look for schools and institutions in the charter space that are trying to break away from that are excited about the world of ideas and want to introduce that to kids, and that you see that presence, that commitment on their websites and their writings. But yes, I don't think you would want to, of course, lord it over or perhaps lead with it. But if you can talk more about how you want to get students excited about ideas, excited about intellectual thoughts, especially in the context of their own confidence in the value of their ideas. That's the connection that I think the idea that within each child, there is a mathematical innate understanding to be cultivated, or a love of literature to be set afire. I think that emphasis could be very compelling to the right audience. And if the school doesn't respond to it, it's not a good fit for you. And you want someone that does, because it's so important. You want schools that are committed to the liberal arts ideal, and they're out there, but they're not the majority.
I would say that the biggest piece of advice that I give to my candidates, to folks that I'm helping coach through this, is that the PhD is extremely important. It's an incredible achievement that you've done. But when you're moving into this world of K through 12, kind of to echo Katerina, what's most important to them is that you want to be working with kids, that you enjoy working with young folks. And just like Stephen said, you want to spark their ideas, you want to spark their knowledge and their growth. And so the biggest piece that I try and encourage PhDs to lead with is not that I got a PhD, but more that I'm intentionally choosing to work with young folks to help them see why maybe they want to get a PhD, right? That is the whole goal of K-12 education, I feel, is to help them figure out their academic path. And so the more that you can showcase your decision to make that choice, to make that move into K through 12 is going to be better for you. And it isn't to underserve the work that you did as a PhD at all. And in fact, many schools, especially independent schools, are going to be very happy that you have a PhD, and they'll put it up on their website, and they'll be very excited to tout your academic background. But when they're going to hire you, they want to make sure that when you're in the classroom, that you're going to make those kids feel comfortable, and you're going to help them express themselves academically.
Okay, we're going to hope that Josie's video is reconnected and that we can hear her. I want to ask a really practical, very practical question about resumes, CVs, and how to get the process started. So let me boil it down to two, for now. Do you advise people to start crafting a resume or a CV and or shifting their existing CV in some way to make it speak to high schools? Where do they go for advice to do this? And then the other question, more for both from the teachers on the call and also for Carney Sandoe, who starts the process of reaching out to a search firm? Is it, how do you contact, what information do you send? You just send a general query. And also, in the interest of transparency, I want to include a question that was asked by one of our audience members about, how much does it cost? Do you charge a fee to the candidates? And if not, does the school pay your fee? Where do we follow the money, to quote the old?
So the most exciting answer first, we're free, and it's not a scam. There's no fine print. There's no gotcha moment when you're hired and we ask for, half of the salary that you make for the rest of your life. That does not exist. We are contracted by the schools. The schools are our clients. They pay us a finder's fee essentially on top of your salary. So it's a completely free service to you. To become a candidate with us, you can go to our website and you'll fill out an application. If you are someone with a master's or PhD in a humanities subject, we will, as Sloan alluded earlier, most likely accept the application. So the word application really should be almost profile, because what you're doing is building out your personal information, your geographic preferences, where you want to teach. There are a couple of short answer questions you can fill in. Who is your favorite teacher growing up and why? Or name or describe yourself in 5 adjectives, that kind of a thing. So that's how you'll initiate contact with us, or just a general email to either of us, and we'll at that point send you the link to the application just so you get in our system. And if you are a candidate with us, we definitely offer CV review or CV into resume transition. I would say the first and foremost issue would be brevity. Independent schools really only want to read 3 pages maximum of experience, and what's most important is going to be your degree. So still list the fact that you have this PhD in art history from XYZ, institution, but then any and all teaching or youth experience, and feel free to go way back. People sometimes laugh when I ask them if they were camp counselors or even, nannies or babysitters when they were in high school, and they're, 50 or 60-year-old individuals. I mean, that matters, and that matters a lot more to schools than does the presentation that you gave at an academic conference last spring. So that's what you'll want to focus on for a resume.
The really important thing is that you emphasize teaching, because we really want to, first of all, we want to know your teaching experience and your experience with youth, but that also communicates to us that you understand the role, right? So going back to what we were saying earlier about, and I know Sloan touched on this and Katerina touched on this, the importance of really kind of prioritizing the connection with students and the role of teaching. If I see a resume or a CV that is all about the research experience that you have, I'm not sure that you kind of know what you're getting into when you come to a high school or a middle school. And so really putting that teaching experience, forward is what we want to see.
I would just add that I think that in our sector of the charter world, it's very helpful and important that you emphasize your intention to lead for racial equity and how that is going to happen in your practice. And I think that one particular angle on that would really resonate with applicants with PhDs is to emphasize ambitious content for all, that you're committed that one of the most important ways to lead for racial equity is to ensure that all students have at-grade or above-grade content. In other words, understanding that one of the biggest curses of public education is the consistently low expectations that teachers hold for what their students can know and do. So if your resume conveys that you have high expectations of students, I think that's going to be a huge positive.
Great. More to add from anyone else about the job prospect? I'm hearing that, to answer the question clearly, that you are using the words resume. So I think it's a resume that you want to prepare, not a CV, and that the cover letter really isn't similar. You're not going to talk about your research. You're going to foreground your teaching and really rethink yourself as a person who's committed to, as a couple of you have put it, getting young people excited about ideas. That's a really good question.
I will say, Joy, sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
thing.
please.
I know that sometimes it is tough for PhD folks to kind of give up that CV. And so something that I say to help with that, to ease the blow a little bit, is that you can always put at the end of your resume full academic CV available upon request. And there are schools that will request it because they do want to see all of your publications and things like that. So you don't have to just, toss it in the bin and never see your CV ever again. Like there is room for both of these things in that world. So, but the resume is great. You can always put a line at the bottom saying that you have the full thing available if people want to see it. So I know sometimes it can be heartbreaking to hear, well, what, I've been working on this for so long and now you want me to toss it out. So I just wanted to put that out there.
No, thank you. Go ahead, Josie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add just to build on something Stephen said. And this might not come through in your resume so much as a cover letter that you write, but independent schools are very, very interested right now, as many other sectors are as well, in issues of equity and inclusion and belonging for students. And we also, we sort of see it when it's authentic, I would say. And so if you have some authentic experience in those areas, whether working with students or in another capacity, I would certainly highlight that in a cover letter to talk about your knowledge of issues around equity and belonging. And familiarity with the individual school that you're writing to is really crucial. So anybody who can say, in a letter, your program in X, Y, and Z is really appealing, and here's why, that certainly catches my attention.
That's really good to hear. And in fact, leads me to another question about that I would ask this group actually to answer on one of two paths or both. When you're a person thinking of applying and you're trying to imagine, prepare, represent your own teaching experience and then start translating that into the experience of teaching younger students, any advice you have on how to make that genuine, how to kind of put some legs under it? And then also, once you're in the classroom, once you are fortunate enough to secure that job, how does faculty development work? Is it, and certainly I know the university and college world, and we all know the awful truth about that world, which is how little faculty development in the area of pedagogy, in the classroom, university faculty, college faculty get, even in small colleges purportedly devoted to teaching. It can be very, very spotty. So with that experience in mind, how does one present teaching in a way that translates persuasively into the high school application? And then once you're in the job, what kind of guidance does a school provide? How do you learn how to do the job once you're in it? Yeah, Katerina.
I would say two things. I think as you're preparing your application, you should definitely read up a little bit on education, read a book. I think the book that Stephen mentioned is amazing. I would highly recommend it. I think, higher education could learn something from it too. I read education blogs. I like Cult of Pedagogy, which, is easier to read. You don't have to read a whole book. I think that's important just so you have the lingo down, which I didn't have down when I first started. It just makes you a little bit more credible, I think. And then another thing I think that comes across as authentic and as you thinking seriously about the teaching problem is if you can describe a problem that you've encountered in the classroom and how you solved it. So like, I was doing this with my class and I saw that they were not getting it, or the dynamic was off, or they were not talking to each other. And I watched this over a couple of classes, and then I decided something needs to change, and here's what I tried. I think this sort of approach of I am thinking about it constantly, and I'm aware when something goes wrong, and then I try to problem solve, I think is something that everybody appreciates. And teachers also like to have that kind of conversation constantly. So I think that will signal that you're into it, but it'll also signal that you're an interesting colleague to talk to and to, throw ideas back and forth. Oh, and then I was going to mention PD, professional development. That's a great reason to, I think, start your teaching career in independent schools, is because they have really big budgets for professional development. And they will, at least in my case, they fund a ton of things. You can just apply for like a seminar or conference and send you there. But they also do a lot of PD in-house. So I benefited enormously from that. So.
Yeah, I was gonna speak to that same point, that schools, I think independent schools are very invested in excellent teaching, and they put their money behind that, their resources behind that. And so that comes through with everything from sort of faculty meeting programming to paying for you to go to a workshop or a conference to develop your teaching skills. And so I think you can really ask for and receive terrific support for growth as a teacher at an independent school. I also think every school I've been with has had a pretty intensive performance review or evaluation process in the first few years. And those have always been geared towards sort of the assumption that the teacher can grow and improve and become better, rather than any kind of sort of like, do X, Y, and Z or you're out kind of approach. It's very much around what are your strengths and how can we help you build on those strengths. And so I think the kind of entering the career with the expectation that you're in an environment where people want to help you improve as a teacher is a great place to be.
Yes, I would just say that I agree with everything that's been said, and would say that in the urban charter sector, again, networks, there is a huge investment in PD. You can expect to go to an entire month of pre-service training in the month of August as a new teacher. Is really quite demanding, with a lot of fish bowling and role playing and at bats as you learn the specific pedagogies. So you needn't feel like you arrive to the demo lesson already knowing how to do those things, because you are going to be trained in them. It also occurs to me that as we think about this, how can applicants with PhDs distinguish themselves and play to their strengths? And it occurs to me that one of the best ways to do that is if you're on the humanities side and, for example, you're giving a demo lesson, choose a lesson, say on a poem or something like that, where your goal is to have the students land the metaphorical meaning of the poem by the end of the class. You are uniquely equipped even without teaching experience, to be able to do that in a way that many other candidates aren't, because of your own intellectual clarity about what the meaning of the poem is. And so you're able to develop that roadmap of questions that you would use with your kids in the demo lesson to reliably get to that point. Very few applicants are going to be able to do that, but you are advantaged because of your intellectual strengths in preparing to do that. And your principal and so on will be dazzled if you pull that off. So that's actually an advantage that I think you would have.
Thank you. That I'm going to transition to our probably our last excuse me, round of questions in the last 10 minutes that we have. And I'm going to pivot by saying that we had a question about how are independent schools navigating the current political climate, how hostile can it be towards curriculum, teachers, school boards, et cetera. It's such a complex and variable environment. I mean, there's no easy way to answer that. And honestly, I think you'll find schools where religious schools that have some questions to ask about their approach to integrating their religious values into curriculum and preparing diverse students for a very diverse world. And then you'll have very progressive schools also struggling with a different set of questions and parents and teacher constituencies in a totally different way. So I think I'll kind of executive answer that question by saying that in keeping with the advice you've been getting from the people on the panel, that finding the set of schools that you want to look into, that you want to learn more about, is really the answer. And then you'll at that point, have a certain amount of public record material to be able to look into, and the culture of the school through the website and so on, and then through the interview process. I think where I want to end though is with a question about what it is about the teaching experience, about the faculty experience in an independent school or a charter school, either that you've seen other people value, or that you yourself have valued, the thing that you want to hold up as the reward for taking this turn, and just elaborate a bit on this, because I think it's that leap into the unknown that a lot of PhD students I talk to, it's a new world for them, and they're looking back. I think I don't want to overgeneralize, but I certainly have met many PhDs, many faculty, university faculty, for whom junior high school and high school were not the happiest years of their lives. And so for all kinds of reasons, and one might say maybe that's just a universalizable experience, but they look back on high school and junior high school and think, oh, what is it really like? What kinds of experiences would I have as a faculty member? So I want to open that up. An experience you want to lift up and share that's rewarding about this turn in your careers, or that you've seen in others.
And not with my Carney Sandoe hat on, but with my former educator hat on, because I became a high school teacher because I was applying for PhDs at the time when you probably shouldn't have been. It was the first recession and there was no funding. And I very, very much wanted to go off and be a PhD person and pursue my PhD in medieval history. And then just decided that was not going to happen. So I took a job at a charter school, just thinking I would do it for 1 year and then reapply. And was very committed to that, thinking that was my path. And became a teacher and very quickly realized, no, this is the path. And I think that the connections that you get to have with students and the intellectual curiosity that I felt every day building lessons for students. My background is in medieval history, but I taught US history, world religions, African history. I taught all sorts of different things. And the intellectual work that went into researching and building those lessons plans and then building them in a way that helped students grow and develop was exactly what I was looking for, and really filled the missing need of that I thought that I was going to give up by not pursuing the PhD. And I never looked back after that. And taught for 6 years, and now I work with teachers. But I think I am still in touch with students that I've taught when I was a teacher. I follow their work and their growth, and there's nothing more satisfying and more validating than hearing from one of them now. She just got a job working for Sotheby's in their museum, and the whole reason that she has a PhD in history is because of my freshman year class. And so there's nothing better than that, I think. And so that's my 2 cents as to why it's worth it.
I'll build on that because I have a sort of similar perspective. My only concern really when I returned to teaching from graduate school was that I would get bored, basically, that I would sort of teach the same thing year after year. I knew people who had taught the same course for 35 years, and wouldn't that be boring? And I will tell you, I have never been bored, like not for a minute. It is endlessly interesting to think about content and to think about how a 14 or an 18-year-old's brain works and absorbs that content, and how can I communicate with those students in a way that it makes sense. And there's almost, I would almost like correlate it to like a runner's high. There's a feeling you get in the classroom when like it all comes together. I was teaching last week Marx, the Communist Manifesto, to 9th graders, right? And so like they've heard about communism, they sort of have a vague idea, but they don't know anything about it. And like when you get to the end of that lesson and it's sort of all come together and they're like, aha, I understand what he's saying, and here's my argument with it, and here's where I think he's right, and they really can get into that material. That's a feeling that just doesn't, it doesn't fade when you get that kind of keeps me going. And so and like I said, it's endlessly interesting to me, the kind of year after year thinking about how to do it better. So I am thrilled with, like, I have never looked back with the choice I've made.
Yeah, I would just say very similar thing, that we have not yet discovered the feeling of what children can know and do at each grade. And so you would be part of that incredible exploration. I remember once we had a teacher who taught a unit where they were studying in the 6th grade, the Auden poem on the fall of Icarus. And in class, they were asked to write a short poem themselves, adopting the vantage point of whatever character they wanted. And one student, a girl, wrote a poem. We were so dazzled, we Googled it, we assumed it was somehow plagiarized. And it was absolutely extraordinary. And those moments happen all the time. And it's just incredibly rewarding. And then if you add into that kids who are coming from tremendous disadvantage and are going to college for the first time, it's really pretty thrilling.
I would echo everything that's been said. I think it's the most creative, exciting, and also the most difficult and most challenging job. I come home and I have to tell myself, this was so difficult, and there are problems here that I need to solve, and they're hard to solve. I would maybe add that, and this sounds cheesy, but I really mean it, that it's a job that fills you with hope. Like this country's been through a really, I want to say like 5 or so years of upheaval and misery. But I get to spend my days with teenagers. And when I compare myself to other adults my age, I am more optimistic than they are. The current generation is the most politically involved and the most politically active. And it's really inspiring to be with them and to hear them sort of talk about how this is the mess that we created, but they're going to do things differently. And to be a part of that, I think is nice. Like I was probably a happier person over the last 5-6 years or so than some of my friends who get to spend less time with teenagers.
Well, it's difficult to top that in terms of comments. I mean, I'll just say that it is difficult not to sound over sentimentalizing or slightly corny or cheesy when saying this, but I serve on the board of a high school and had occasion to recently spend some time with students there in a fairly, I mean, it was an intense dialogue. And I think hope is exactly the word that describes how I felt walking out. I mean, not totally divorced from the situation and all the issues we were talking about. It was just hope for the world and hope for the future, because the liveliness and like crackle of thought and energy, there's just nothing like it. So at that age, so I had my moments of thinking about alternative tracks for myself, or had I another life to live. But let me thank you. I mean, this is all of you that you've given us, both inspiration, things to chew on, some kind of cold hard facts about how the process works, but I think the range of issues that you managed to cover was impressive and really helpful. I want to thank our audience members, particularly those who asked probing questions. We didn't get to quite all of them. I'm sorry that for the last few that were left uncovered, but unanswered. But thank you for your participation. Thank you to our panelists. I want to wish you all good luck, those of you who are on the job hunt or advising those who are. And for those of you on the panel, good luck for the rest of the academic year. Really wonderfully well done. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and good night.